what I want to show you here is the process of glazing within ceramics. So one of the first things you've got to make sure you do is the areas clean and wipe down, and that includes your work as well. You need to make sure your bisque fired work is wiped so there isn't any dust or greasy fingers, things like that. That's going to act as a resist for the glaze, so it's really important that the surfaces are clean. I've got here some glaze in the bucket. It's quite a large amount of glaze, so I can use the industrial mixer to mix it up, and it's really important that you thoroughly mix a glaze, because over time it settles out and you get kind of like a solid sludge at the bottom. Some glazes are more well behaved than others, and it's much easier to mix them up. It doesn't take very long, whereas some others it could take sort of 10 minutes with a mixer running to get them going. You can do it with your hand, but I would make sure you've got some gloves on, particularly for coloured glazes and things like this. But we should be alright with this white earthenware glaze that I've got. Really important that you clean the mixer as well. We don't want to find glazes being contaminated with each other, and there's nothing more disappointing than having to clean up somebody else's mess before you start. Make sure it's not switched on when you're doing this. You want to keep all your fingers, and we don't want water and electricity mixing. So I'm using some tongs, straight in with the bisque fired piece and out again. You can see I'm only in the glaze there for about a minute, and if you're quick you can use a damp sponge to remove any glaze from the base, and it just makes it much better for when you're putting it in the kiln. You don't want any areas coming into contact with the kiln shelf that have got glaze on them, because of course it's going to get stuck. There are some other things you can do, but I'll show you that later on. If your fingers are dry and the glaze is dry, any little blips or marks, these are from the tongs, you can just gently rub them away. You see I've got a little bit sticking up there, just pulled that over with my nail. These bottles are all earthenware colours. You'll see those when you go in the glaze room. You need to mix those up, so shaking them is the same as using a mixer. They're about £10–12 in cost, so just decant what you need into the container, and then when you're finished you can actually unscrew the top on those and put what you don't use back in. And you can see here I'm deliberately, very generously applying a layer of this glaze. This is a brush on glaze, so it's actually usually much thicker than the glazes are in the bucket there, and you can see how applying that over the top of a white glaze, it goes on quite well. This is the spray booth, so before you put any pots on the turntable or the banding wheel, make sure they're lifted up, little supports. Here we've got the spray gun, and that's connected to the compressor below. That's that yellow tank, and you can see on here there's pressure, so there's air in the tank. This little red button is a mushroom switch, that's off, that's on when you lift it up. And just next to that is the pressure gauge, and there's some numbers on the top. You want 3 or 4 bar lined up with that arrow there. It's about 30 psi, and that's usually the kind of pressure you need to spray glaze. Switch the fan and the pump on, and you can see that puts a curtain of water behind, so that's collecting all the excess glaze for health and safety reasons. You can see here that I'm wearing my mask. You should be doing that as well when you're spraying glazes, because if you think about it, it's the same as sort of producing clay dust. I've got here a green earthenware glaze, and I'm just going to spray that over the top of the white glaze that I've already applied earlier on. Always check that the spray gun is working as it should be before you commit to your pot. That's why I've sprayed the side, and you can see it's about having constant movement, moving it back and forth. So here in slow motion you can see how quite a lot of glaze comes out. You can adjust the flow and the pressure, but that comes with a bit of practice. You just need to be turning it and spraying at the same time. If you look closely at this one, you can see where some areas are still quite reflective, so the glaze is still wet. Because there's already a white glaze on there, it's going to take longer to dry. What I'm doing here, I just wanted to show you how you could make a template, something you can spray through. So it's, you know, a bit like a kind of graffiti artist technique of using spray paint through templates and stencils. You can actually do the same thing with a glaze, because effectively, you know, it's the same process of spraying colour. So if I hold this in front of the pot and then spray, you don't need much, and you can see how that then comes out. And obviously the design can be more sophisticated, or you could even use the card to resist, just as you create lines, or you're trying to protect the inside of the pot from the outside, that kind of thing. When you're finished, you need to empty your glaze back and then put the whole thing in a bucket of water to clean it. Obviously make sure you put that glaze back in the bucket, providing it's not contaminated. And if you get clear water going through several times and spraying it, and make sure you wipe down the surface and everything's clean. This of course is housekeeping and best practice for working in the ceramics workshop. So I've got the same green glaze here, so I'm just mix it up with a stick. And what I'm going to do is the pot that I glazed earlier with the red brush on glaze, I'm going to put green on the inside, and it takes a bit of practice, but you should be able to do this by not getting the green on the outside as you empty and rotate in one action. It might be worth practicing just with a jug, plastic jug beforehand, before you commit to your own work, but it's a good skill to use. And then I've got the same pot here. If I dunk this in the white glaze that I originally started with, we can actually coat the brush on red glaze, and then this is just as an experiment really. You can start to play with the idea of quite a limited palette. So if we use the red glaze again over the top of the white, we are going to see a difference when that comes out of the firing compared to the red under the white glaze. And it's often these really small subtle things that can make a difference. Now can you see on this one I've left the whole pot is glazed, whereas that one originally, do you remember I wiped that off with a sponge? So I want to show you when I put these in the kiln how you can actually still have glaze on the bottom if you want, but this only works for earthenware temperatures. It doesn't work for stoneware. Yeah, and what I've got here is some little kiln supports or stilts, little spikes, and they just lift the ware from the kiln shelf, and that makes that safe to fire without getting stuck or damaging the kiln. So we'll close this up, and because of the magic of film, we won't need to wait 2.5 days before we open the kiln again on there. So with some editing we can go straight back again. This firing's been to 1100 degrees C, that's earthenware firing temperature, and you can see very stable. The glazes, what you see is what you get. They actually look quite similar to how we started out. There you can see the tongs that have stuck on the bottom there, the stilts rather, stuck on the bottom, but that will soon lever off. Just watch for the sharp bits on there, and you can see the difference between the red being under and over the white glaze, how that changes it, and you can change the thicknesses as well as you do that. Hopefully you found that useful and a good introduction to the process of glazing.